John, hello. We did this yesterday. We're doing a review of what we both got in terms of reflection the day after, learning-wise, from a small group discussion around the application of the Dunning-Kruger model. Now, I'll show the Dunning-Kruger model a bit for anybody watching this. There might be somebody. But broadly speaking, what did you feel yourself that you came away with that you didn't go in with in terms of the practical applications of Dunning-Kruger?
Yeah, so hey Andrew, how are you? Yeah, it was a good session yesterday, and the first thing I take away is how wonderful the people were on the session, because great insights, great thoughts about how it could be important. So for me, the key thing I took away, I think, was how the insight of how important it could be for building career paths and building capabilities early on in the workplace. So it's for early careers sort of people, and how everybody's really passionate about how they could use this to leverage that and have better conversations and really use this as a real talking point. So that was the key thing I took away, and it was fascinating to hear some of the stories on yesterday. So I'm sure that will probably align with some of your thoughts you have as well.
Yeah, it was good to be in the company of people who were prepared to take the time, which people don't seem to have much of these days, to thoroughly explore, articulate, share, and ask questions of each other. It was very powerful. I enjoyed it a lot.
No, it was great. And some of the sort of the analogies and stories worked really well, I thought. So yeah, I thought it was a great session, and something that I guess the Dunning-Kruger effect's not something that's on. It's not the first discussion lots of people have in the workplace. Let's put it that way.
No, I think that's true, and yet people do talk about people feeling they're not as good as they think they are. People talk about imposter syndrome at the other end of a career, where people say to themselves, crikey, what have I got to show for 40 years in this business, in my case? So I think people talk about it without hanging it on the model.
No, totally agree. And yeah, it is. And there's, as you kind of rightly highlighted yesterday, but there is an inversion of this. So Dunning and Kruger, when they first studied it, they did note that people who were classed as the kind of in the top sort of 20 percentile of expertise, however you measure that. When they were surveyed, they would rank themselves as considerably lower than their expertise would actually show. So you're absolutely right. It could show that on the inverse of this, it could lead to other psychological phenomena like imposter syndrome and various other things like that. So a lot of these things are linked when we think about it. So, I mean, imposter syndrome is very, very well spoken, and in some places, it's fashionable, isn't it? You talk about imposter syndrome and all that. But again, that's a psychological bias that's probably come from prehistoric times, almost to keep our feet on the ground somewhat. And I think that it's almost weird because the chart that you've got on the screen, the Dunning-Kruger effect, is almost the inverse of that. You've got people that early on there, they're incredibly, it's almost the complete opposite of imposter syndrome. It's kind of or maybe this is the real imposter syndrome, and this is the thing. So this could be the real imposter syndrome, where people think they're brilliant at everything and really believe that. Isn't that the real imposter syndrome? And people actually, when they're really confident, when they're really knowledgeable, and they understand that they're not that confident in their subject, they're actually quite right, because nobody can be totally expert in anything they do. So maybe this is the real imposter syndrome. I don't know. I've just thought of that.
I just watched that happen. I just watched you, as you spoke it and articulate it, travel the journey that says imposter syndrome is not purely the domain of the late career retrospective person. It can also be the imposter that says, I'm great, but actually only I seem to think that right now.
Yeah, that was you noticed the light bulb go on, I think, above my head. But absolutely right, yeah, because both is wrong, isn't it? Both is false.
It is, and both, John, need an intervention, which I don't think happens very often. The intervention early on that doesn't burst the bubble, like we said yesterday, of someone with energy, with commitment, with ambition. That's brilliant. We want all those things. So what we don't want to do is to say, hey, John Whitfield, you're not as good as you think you are. Who do you think you are? You want to say, John Whitfield, you're great. I love what you're doing. There's no but coming. And I want to get a realistic picture of where you are, which might not be entirely where you think it is, because I don't want you to be closed to early development that's of value to you because you think you know more than you actually do. That's a difficult conversation to have, and I don't know many line managers with that skill.
Yeah, that's because it's a complicated thing, isn't it? You know, we're talking about people, and you've done many coaching conversations over the years, and I've done a bit around my time. And everybody's different, and you can go into a conversation and expect one thing, and you come out at the end and you think, "Wow, that wasn't quite what I was expecting," and the outcomes are very different than you would have thought. But and that's why it's so difficult, and that's why sometimes, and we sometimes do generalize, and we go, right, if we do this for everyone, then everybody will be happy because we know that there's imposter syndrome is a thing, and we need to make sure that people. But sometimes, and just I don't want to harp onto the imposter syndrome thing, but sometimes maybe we feed the Dunning-Kruger effect because we tell people that they're better than they possibly are sometimes because we're kind of thinking of this maybe we don't understand the imposter syndrome enough. People are saying, "Oh, I suffer from imposter syndrome, blah 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 blah," but maybe they should.
Or maybe, John, we just abdicate the responsibility for having a grown-up conversation about performance.
Indeed. And I think you're right. And I think that's what it boils down to, isn't it, Andrew? I mean, having adult conversations, not necessarily, to other side of the table, you kind of, your typical manager, underling sort of, very relaxed conversations about what the expectations are, where we're at. And they don't have to be confrontational. They can be very polite and soft and even caring, But I think getting people to understand their limitations and getting them to understand what the expectations are. But also, I think what came out yesterday is giving them exposure to people who are very good at what they do.
To benchmark their own competence.
Benchmark their own competence, because that can be a massive eye-opener for somebody who's never done that. They can come in and think, I'm the best, I'm the best as ever been. And then they come in and work with a team who are very good. And then very quickly they go, oh, okay, I've got a lot to learn. And that can be a very soft way of doing it, because although their confidence does get knocked somewhat because it's understandable, they're not deflated because they just understand that they're working with better people. And I think the sooner they realize that in one aspect of their life, they can tend to take it to other aspects as well. And before they know it, they realize that actually life is a learning curve that never ends.
Absolutely. And there is a lot of depth, a lot of meatiness in this model. The things that also came through for me, because I know time's tight for both of us. We're trying to keep this tight anyway. No one wants to make a 5-hour recording on anything.
I reckon we could if we want. I reckon if we left to our own devices, we could. Believe me.
I think there's a temptation if you look at Dunning-Kruger or another career model of any sort. The temptation is to be front-loaded. And to think careers and talent management as being the preserve of the under 20-somethings. There are other talent, there's more talent to manage than people in their 20s and 30s. There's more talent out there that could be dissipating and diminishing if you don't look after it in later careers.
No, I totally agree. And there is, I mean, you see everywhere you look on LinkedIn and wherever, and there's this big drive for early careers, getting youngsters involved, and rightly so. They are going to be the future leaders of any business out there. However, you've also got people in the middle of their career who have kind of, it's almost like they've become settled, and however, there's a massive skill set there and a massive knowledge. A big knowledge resource of, okay, how can we leverage that a little bit more? How we can give people opportunity that maybe thought their opportunities had gone.
These are questions we're asking of organizations I don't see answered very often. I'm an organizational critic, partly because I don't fit in them. They don't suit me. But I look at many organizations. I don't see this happening. Sometimes I hear people say they're doing it. I look for evidence of it. It's not happening. I do not see the valuing of people in later careers, such that those sorts of conversations you're talking about don't slip into complacency. You're great. You're going to get better. We want to look after you. You are valued. I don't see those conversations happening.
No, I don't. And I don't. see almost like a middle career pathway for people. You know, people get onboarded when they, you know, we get apprentices and graduates and early careers coming in, and you know, it's absolutely the fundamentally right thing to do. However, the vast majority of your workforce are not early careers. So what you're going to do for people who are maybe my age, just going to tick over into 50 next year. I've got probably another 20 years to go, depending on how bothered I am. And what you're going to do about that? Because you know what, you're still ambitious, you still want to achieve, and so yeah, you don't see much for like that middle career pathway.
And John, you might also be talking about people with less mobility, not just in your joints, by the way, mate, but just less likely to leave the organization. You might get more value back from these people investing in the 50-year-olds that leave at 62 than your 24-year-olds that might leave at 25.
And I think that's a brilliant point. And again, I've just had
here we go again, John's light bulb moment.
But yeah, I think what it is, we're very good at keeping our early careers employees interested. We're very good at giving them interesting, lots of stuff to do that, you know, they can, because I guess lots of it's new anyway, so it will be interesting. So I think sometimes in the middle careers, people leave a business because they've just gone to a point where nothing is interesting anymore. There's no novelty. There's nothing to make them curious anymore. And I mean, fortunately for us, Andrew, we deal with people, so there'll never be a shortage of things that are interesting. But if you can imagine, if you worked in a particularly, you know, maybe a statistical side or data side where one day is very much the same as the next, unless you're doing something that's going to trigger somebody's curiosity, enthusiasm, and give them that light to think, I'm actually doing something I enjoy, is there any wonder that people may move on?
As I sometimes say, they get up and go is got up and gone.
Indeed, and they generally move to a company that's no better, but the grass is always greener, isn't it?
Or worse still, John, they just stay where they are and say, well, 14 years to retirement, I'll just ride the grinder out. And that's a terrible waste of time.
And you can see that in people when you speak to them. You know, the enthusiasm has gone almost, and it's a shame because a lot of people I've seen, not necessarily where I work now, but over the years, they're very, very talented people with a lot to offer. And I just
John,
think
if that becomes the culture of the organization, if that's the norm, feeling differently and fighting a lone battle amongst other people who generally feel that way is a very hard soup to swim through.
It is, yeah, it is indeed. It's almost impossible. That's why people leave and move on, and so, like, as you're well aware, Andrew, people resign long before they resign.
Yeah,
you know, it's kind of they've gone long before they hand their notice in, long before, and you can see it, you can tell.
So let's be positive. Let's be positive.
Yes,
it is a positive model, and we're being realistic, not negative.
Of course.
To me, talking about the model, it's powerful, it's meaningful, it's not holistic, it's not generic, nor is it rigid. One of the things I found interesting yesterday was the discussion that said, hey, a job consists of many elements, and you can do a Dunning-Kruger graph for each of many elements of the whole job, because some parts of it might be true of one curve, another part of it could be very different. So I think the temptation is to be too holistic in the person, role, and everything.
You've just spoken again. It's like learning, isn't it? You know, it's you can't be generic with learning, because everything we do is a learning opportunity, and we're both from the learning world, and sometimes we see where people try to generalize learning and get everybody to the same level at the same time, and you just can't do it.
So John, we're going to have to close because I know you've got to run off.
I have, unfortunately.
A final comment before you go off and do corporate important things.
Yes, use things like the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a great eye-opener, but don't just take it the one way. Think of it backwards, think of it upside down, and think of all the people that you might be working with that actually are in a point of the Dunning-Kruger effect where it's may affect their performance or affect their future, because it's affected us all at one point. I know I've been on that curve, you know, and been through
Still
it
there
several
somewhere, John.
times. Yeah, and but just bear and see how that then links into other things like imposter syndrome or Johari's window, as was mentioned yesterday, or the change curve, you know, the Kubler-Ross curve, and everything, because all these things are when you look at one thing, you'll see another thing. Oh yeah, that I can see where I am on that compared to that, and it all links together. And then just have really open and honest and frank conversations with people you care about. And that's what
I'm glad you said the last thing, because that would be my final comment. It's a tool to have a dialogue, not to make judgments and presumptions. It's about saying, let's talk about where we both see you right now in relation to this. And there might be consensus, there might be difference of opinion. Let's leave it there, because we've got to keep reopening and you haven't got time for it.
No,
thanks very so much for your time.
We'll talk again.
I appreciate it.
We'll talk again, Andrew, and you keep well.
Thank you very much, John.
Take care.
Look at that. We actually kept a time.
Not bad. That's not like us.